Last year, I found a book called The City of Darkness, Life in the Kowloon Walled City. It's by Greg Girard and Ian Lambeau, or Lambot, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. But it essentially catalogs the now destroyed Kowloon Walled City, a 6.5 acre city housing 35,000 residents. Because of its bizarre legality, the city was just kind of built in a slapdash fashion. There was no laws that prohibited you from building in certain places or what you could build. Floors didn't match up between buildings, water pipes snaked in and out of every residency, and there was essentially no strict building codes in place to give the city any sense of purpose or place. It was expansion for expansion's sake inside a plot of land that could barely afford that, almost like you filled up a party balloon with several hundred gallons of water. The city was so dense you could literally walk from one side to the other without ever seeing sunlight. It was demolished in the 90s because of how much of a fire hazard it was, but it remains one of the most bizarre instances of urban expansion in the modern era. I was obsessed with it. Something about the idea of this place where the principles of urban expansionism were applied to a place with no restrictions, just pure growth for the sake of it. Now, reading about it, the city feels more like an organism than it does a plot of land. Imperfect in the way that it just juts out and expands day by day, with no conditions to smooth it out to something perfect and functional like most cities. It oddly reminded me of home, which is funny because where I grew up, it's not very dense. I think I legally count as a villager. But looking at the walled city, you get this sense of lost purpose, something credited for a function at one point, but is now just background noise in a place so dense that it fades into the ether. Where I grew up, Deming, Washington, you could find tons of dead buildings, shacks out in fields covered in thorn bushes, and barns that were falling apart for decades, signs advertising a casino that closed down 15 years ago. These places of purpose, now far past their expiration date, but standing as a monument of what they used to be. I used to wonder a lot as a child where these came from. They almost appeared naturally, but there was never any explanation. I mean, who could I ask? I can't just knock on the door of everybody who has like a ramshackle cabin in a dead field outside their house. So I would just sit and wonder about these places, lost and out of time. Siwu has a big campus. Central Washington isn't the largest place around per se, but it's certainly not tiny. The place has been around since the late 1800s, which means it's gone over 100 years of tweaks and changes to make it more suited for modern living. In that time, though, things inevitably fall through the cracks. The structures that once had a reason for existing are now either defunct or ignored by the campus population, from buildings to the smallest corners. I think Siwu does a good job of using its space, but you'll often find forgotten sections of campus. Benches in places nobody would sit, pathways nobody would take, endless bike racks that don't see use because why would you park your bike there? I'm not saying Siwu is a dead campus or comparable at all to the Kowloon Walled City, but I do think that curiosity guides me to think about these now useless structures much the same here. Behind me is a small plot of land outside Moore and Anderson. It's got a big tree, some bench tables, and a weird grill thing that doesn't work as far as I know. There's a plot of grass you walk by, but that's about it. Nobody sits out here and eats except me on my way back from work, and it's just not a compelling spot to be. It's open to the elements, it's a plain old picnic table, and if you cross by here, it's likely that you live here, so why wouldn't you just go into one of the buildings? What was once a thoughtful structure now sees barely any use. And that's what I want to examine today. These things don't just magically appear. And unlike organisms which expand through just their nature, these things are deliberately placed down. And that's what I want to examine, these lost and forgotten sections of the Siwu campus. Where I'm sitting right now is a kind of hideaway spot right outside Black Hall. I genuinely do not know why this specific spot is here. We live in Washington, if you couldn't tell, and it's constantly raining and dreary and pretty crappy outside. So a lot of the time, a lot of meeting spots are kind of in more closed areas than what we have right now. I chose this specific spot because I have never seen another person ever sit here. I have only sat here on my lunch breaks when I need a place to go and sit and I don't want to be inside. And even then, I feel like this is a pretty poor choice. It's oriented so that everybody's facing each other, but there's too much distance for you to comfortably sit across from someone without it being kind of awkward. There's no table. You can only set your stuff up on here, and that's not really ideal for reaching back and getting food. I have to kind of crane my neck, and I guess you could put it on the seat, but I feel like that defeats the purpose of having a seat. And in fact, there's already 1, tables inside, and 2, tables literally right out there. In fact, a bunch of them. So really, the big question is, why is this even here? It's been used before. There's a bunch of cigarette butts in this, like, ashtray, but I don't know how long those have been there. I've never seen anybody use this. I'm the only person who's ever sat here during my lunch break, and I can't think of a genuine use for it. These windows are really funny because there's not even a particularly good view. It's literally just one of the buildings, and not even a great view of that. If somebody doesn't work right there like I do, what reason would they have to sit down and eat at this little alcove, I guess, this little clearing? There's bushes back there. There's just an ashtray. There's a trash can that faces this direction, but not out towards where most people are coming from. It's a very bizarre section, and I couldn't explain it if I tried. I can't think of a genuine reason to have it. Really, it's a nothing spot, which is why it's so fascinating to me. Why would you even build this? Why was this in the building plan? Was this here originally? I might not ever know, because it's such a throwaway spot, but it's always intrigued me. Behind me is the Marshall W. May Arboretum, or Arboretum. I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. But this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this project in the first place. It's kind of ethereal out here. It's located in a section where you don't really have a good reason to be back here. It's located down past Dean Hall, next to the irrigation ditch, past a bench that overlooks it, and near the greenhouse. It's right there. And it's a really pretty little pocket of the campus, but nobody I know knows about it. I discovered it my first year back here after COVID, and I found out that it was just kind of lying in wait behind here. I mean, what reason is there to come back here in the first place? It's out of the way for most people, and if you live on campus, there's either dorms that direction, or your parking is probably elsewhere. I've talked to plenty of students across the years, and a lot of them just don't know this section exists. When I see the name, it completely doesn't ring a bell. People have never seen it. I filmed one of my first Production 1 videos here, and I only did that by happenstance because I happened to discover it the day before when I was walking around looking to figure out how to get my parking ticket revoked. And I kind of fell in love with it. It's such a weird niche spot on this entire establishment. There's no reason to go back here. It's out of the way. It's got really nothing going on. It's right next to a bunch of cars, so it's very loud. I don't know if you can hear that on camera, but it definitely picks up audio from the road behind us. And it's kind of just a pocket of forest in basically a forestless campaign. The closest thing I can think of is the big field that kind of separates the mall from all the science and Dean buildings over this direction. I don't know. There's something special about it for me. I find myself walking back here as often as I can because, well, it's not used often. I don't ever see anybody walk past here aside from people who are walking their dogs on the weekends, and I don't really count those as students most of the time. Students don't really know about this place, and it's not really close to any food establishments, so it's not like it's a good spot to sit down and eat. The closest thing I can think of is Panda, but if you're going to be there, why not use any of the benches outside or inside or at the library? This is really out of the way for basically anything you're doing unless you work here at the greenhouse, but it's open for everybody. I don't know why this was put here. I don't know what an arboretum or an arboretum even is, but I do know that this is a special little pocket of the campus that not many folks know about, and I don't think many will. Why would they? I've got an affection for things that look like home, and this looks like home to me. I'm from an area of Washington that, surprise, surprise, rains a lot and has bad weather and just kind of looks like junk all the time. But it has pretty little forests and nice lights occasionally, and I think this is a little pocket of home for me in that case. It feels like something that should be more of a mainstay on campus, but because of its positioning, nobody knows about it. And what a shame. I'm outside Stevens Whitney, which is a dorm on campus, and one that I pass by frequently. I used to live in Moore, which is right up the hill, and every day I actually go down this main pathway here. And this bike rack is why I wanted to bother making this project in the first place. I passed by this bike rack, and when you pass by things every day, and it just kind of becomes part of the daily routine. It blends together. It doesn't require any detail from your brain to register. Well, I was passing by one day, and my bike is currently a little broken, and I noticed that there was a bike rack here, and I wondered, why the hell is there a bike rack here? There's a perfectly good bike rack back there, and there's a perfectly good bike rack up that way, that direction, and down near the circ. So why is there one located outside the building, and where there's normally bike racks in there, and why does it not work? I mean, you saw the intro here. I tried to park my bike, and this thing is facing the wrong direction. There's not enough width here to even park it in the first place. The wheel doesn't fit. And there's something so fascinating about a piece of the building or architecture or whatever you would call it that's just completely useless. I know its intended purpose. I know why it's here, and I know what it was put here for, in theory. But in practice, there's no use for it. This thing here is almost completely, utterly useless. You can kind of shift it left and right, but if you can pick up a bike rack, what is the point of having a bike rack? It's basically just here for visual noise, and I can't figure out why they would even bother putting one here. It's not a popular spot to park your bike. It's not like you can't just go inside. If you're visiting somebody here at Stevens Whitney, you could just park your bike in the bike rack over that direction. So this is one of those things where I thought to myself, this is a genuinely useless piece of this building. Why was this put here? Who decided, hey, let's put a bike rack outside the building on a pathway that most people don't even cross unless they're coming from the circ and through the most unpopular entrance, and let's put it in a way that makes it nearly impossible to park your bike in. And I don't know. I want to be inside the head of the person who put this here and ask them what they were thinking. Was this a slapdash job? Was this just put here because they had an extra bike rack and they couldn't figure out what to do with it? It's really interesting. Stevens Whitney is kind of a liminal spot for me. I pass by it all the time, but I never really go in here. I don't have any friends that live here right now. Well, I do, but that's a recent addition. And I never visit them here. I've never been inside the buildings. I've only gotten a sneaking glance. And on the inside, it's not like the main area gets used very often. That's one of the things with the dorms here. If you're not a first year and you're not in a first year dorm, a lot of the amenities provided to you by the buildings aren't really used very often, because by that point you probably found your own groove with your friends or your own room or basically anything else. Outside here is, I think, a volleyball court that hasn't seen use in forever. I used to walk by and see dandelions blowing in the wind as I went by, letting you know how often that this place got used. And this here, I think, is a perfect example of the kind of structures on the campus that just don't serve any sort of function, at least not their intended one. It's exhausting just sitting here. But really, what is the point? It's off the ground. You can move the damn thing, but only barely. And why would you? So, all in all, it's one of these things where you're just left wondering, why is this here? Did nobody test it? Did nobody notice that you can't park your bike inside the bike rack? Its only intended function? As of right now, it's just a piece of metal lying outside a building, meant to be ignored by most people. It'll never see its intended use. In fact, what I just did there at the beginning was probably the first time it's been used for its intended purpose in months, maybe even years, and I couldn't even do it. And, even if these things are often overlooked or ignored, I still think they're worthy of something. And I guess that is indicative of the way I feel about buildings in general. They're these monuments to creation, You can live there, you work there. No building is made with no purpose. But it's where you kind of see these things fail, or there's no intended way to interact with them, like this bike rack here. And I think that's fascinating. It's liminal, it's bizarre, and it's kind of charming in a way. And I hope that by doing this project, I've shed some light on the bizarre nature of a place that has to house thousands of people at once, and the things that are left behind in the process. The essence of these places is one that fascinates me. Something about them is just missing. They can't do what they were meant to do. They're in spots that would prevent them from even doing it in the first place, usually, and everything about them is, in a sense, long gone. Placed deliberately, with dozens of man-hours put into making them even exist, and they're just abandoned by the crowd at large. It's a bit sad. However, even if these things are forgotten, they can still be remembered. I have a weird amount of camaraderie with these places. For every time that I've needed to find a seat outside at lunch, or every time I've needed to find a place to step away from the crowd and relax, and for every time I've needed just a reminder of home. It's there for me. And these places are much the same as the decrepit barns in Deming or the winding tunnels of the walled city. Perhaps they can't do what they were made for, but in that, they find new purpose, curiosity, and comfort.